Hey guys, it's History Behind the Warrior and welcome back to yet another Mortal Kombat video. Now, in today's history of breakdown and analysis, I will be talking about a former champion of Mortal Kombat, the prince of the Shokan Bloodline, Goro. But in order to talk about Goro properly, we must first go quite far back in time to an age that predates the very first installment, pre-Mortal Kombat. Now, Goro is of royal blood, having come from a long line of half-man, half-dragon hybrids, the Shokan. The Shokan are a proud and very powerful race that resides within Outworld, a truly incredible line of warriors destined to fight until the very end. But that's not to say that they didn't have some competition in Outworld. In the very early years of the realm, all races were somewhat fighting to find their place, and because of this, the Shokan crossed paths with the centaurs. The two races immediately came to blows with each other, waging wars that would drench Outworld in blood. This feud would last thousands of years until Shao Kahn arose. After Onaga had fallen, the realm quivered in fear of its new ruthless emperor. With his heart set on conquest, Shao Kahn sought out all possible forces he could recruit into his ranks, with the Shokan of course being one of them. Now, the Shokan did somewhat accept Shao's invitation out of fear, knowing what the emperor was truly capable of. Now, because of this, the centaurs would quickly follow suit, but despite them now being somewhat allies with each other, the two races competed for the favor of the emperor in the hopes that the other would be wiped out by doing so. And this brings us to Goro. Now, Goro was a born fighter. On top of this, he was the son of the prestigious Gorbak. Whilst not much is disclosed about the early years of Goro's life, he was raised like any other Shokan, a proud warrior, and because of this, he was seen by many as a successful heir to the throne, something that was seen across the kingdom. He wasn't raised with a silver spoon in his mouth, he was raised as a juggernaut, which is what actually had caught the emperor's attention. You see, after Shao had unified the races of Outworld, he would begin his war across the realms, killing and enslaving all that stood before him, and this even included the likes of Edenia. After this huge victory, his next target would be Earthrealm. But unlike the previous realms Shao had conquered, this one was very troublesome, as the battle between both sides had been extremely back and forth. That is, until he recruited the likes of Shang Tsung. The sorcerer was a shunned fighter from Earthrealm, and in his bitter state, as he had been abandoned by his former allies. He had fallen into the hands of Shao Kahn, who would teach him the dark arts, and have him become their representative. From here, Shang would go to win tournament after tournament, until he had crossed paths with Earthrealm's new champion, the Great Kung Lao. The sorcerer was swiftly defeated by the Shaolin, but in his defeat, Shao found a new champion. Seeking out new blood and talent, the emperor was captivated by the sheer force and brute strength of Goro. So in the very next tournament, Goro would be entered into Mortal Kombat and destroy everyone in his way, even killing the likes of the Great Kung Lao. Now, Goro had become Outworld's champion for a multitude of different reasons. Whilst loyal to Shao, he still had a deep care for his people, and thus wished to elevate them and their status amongst Outworld's ranks. The rivalry with the centaurs only intensified over the years, but by being their champion, he could somewhat guarantee the safety of the Shokan. He had also entered to prove his worth to Outworld, that he could be a worthy successor to his father, and eventually take over his father's role. So Goro brought great honor to both his race and his family. But as we all do know, this reign wouldn't last forever. Mortal Kombat. Now, Goro's long reign spills over into the events of the very first game, where Outworld is now on the brink of victory, and things aren't looking particularly too great for Earthrealm. But with a new team of fighters, Raiden and the Earthrealm defenders are able to successfully stop Outworld, with Liu Kang being able to defeat Goro. Upon the champion's defeat, Shang Tsung's island would begin to crumble beneath their feet, and eventually it fell into the ocean. Goro was believed by many to have in fact fallen in this battle, and would later go on to be replaced by another Shokan champion, that being Kintaro in Mortal Kombat 2. But sadly, the Tiger warrior would also lose to the Shaolin. From here, a huge rift opened between the Shokan and Shao Kahn, with the emperor now believing that the Shokan were all talk and no substance. Thus, because of this, he would now place his his faith in the Shokun's mortal enemy, the centaurs, and believing that the Shokan had overstayed their welcome in Outworld, Shao Kahn, along with the centaurs, would begin to attack their kingdom whilst invading Earthrealm. With Motaro at his side, he would try to decimate their kingdom. This would be a battle that the Shokan would be locked in for a very long time. It spills over into the start of the third game, and even continues by the end of it. But during this time, even when Edenia was released from Shao's control, he would still be locked in battle with them. But this brings us up to our events of the next game, Mortal Kombat. After a very long canonical disappearance, Goro finally returns in the fourth installment, fighting off the centaurs on Shokan territory. Things were looking pretty grim on both sides, with Outworld's grounds once again soiled by centaur and Shokan blood. But before this battle could carry on, Edenia would interfere. Upon being freed from the Emperor's clutches, Sindel and Katana would make it their personal mission to put a stop to everything the Emperor wanted to do. This included the feud between the Shokan and the centaurs. So after a long talk between both sides, a treaty and alliance would be formed, but not before Kung Lao could interfere. Wanting to somewhat avenge his fallen ancestor, Kung Lao would slash the Shokan prince across the chest, marking him with a ceremonial blow, something that would make the prince remember his wrongdoings under Shao Kahn. Whilst this pleased with the scar he would retain, he always respected the Great Kung Lao, and thus would honor him and his descendants, and thus the small feud between the two sides was quickly ended. With an alliance now formed with Edenia, the two sides would work in conjunction with each other once Shinnok sprung his attack across the realms. With a valiant push, they were able to not only dissolve the Brotherhood of Shadow, but Shinnok was once again cast to the Netherrealm. This was a very important point for the Edenian Shokan alliance, as they finally realized that they did have the power to dethrone Shao Kahn. Together they would push against the Emperor's empire, causing it to nearly crumble. But as victory was on the horizon, tragedy would strike, and Goro was killed by Noob Saibot. Or was he? Mortal Kombat Deception. During the conflict, the weakened prince would be struck down by the Revenants, but before he could be killed, his body would be taken away by Shao Kahn, who in turn he decided to heal. Why? Well, Shao wasn't a fool. He had sensed his imminent demise and knew of the deception within his own ranks. Because of this, he created a body double to act as him, in turn giving him the opportunity to slip from the public eye. And when he saw his former champion struck down, he decided to nurse him to health to propose a deal. He gave Goro a choice, an opportunity to aid him, a deal that he couldn't refuse. Shao knew that there was still tension between the Shokan and the centaurs, and said to Goro that if he once again joined his side, then together they could annihilate all of the centaurs that existed. And whilst hesitant, as he was a somewhat being of honor, he could not turn down this opportunity. Whilst the Edenian alliance had really benefited the Shokan race, he could not turn a blind eye to the amount of blood the centaurs had spilt, and on top of this, he was in debt to the Emperor. So whilst reluctant, the prince would join his side once again, faking his own demise, so the two could plot from the shadows for their eventual return. Mortal Kombat Armageddon. Goro makes his next big return after the fall of the Dragon King Onaga. During this time, Mileena has gained temporary control of Edenia, and would later go on to rule Outworld. But this was a role Shao wasn't interested in playing, and thus he stormed his fortress with Goro, and together they took back the throne. But this is something that Mileena would willingly give up. She was no fool to Shao's brutality. Now with Goro by the Emperor's side, the alliance with Edenia was now severed, and the Shokan were once again aligned with Shao Kahn. To begin their assault on the centaurs, they would put a curse on them, transforming them from their mighty centaur forms to, in fact, minotaurs, which is something that did indeed hinder their strength. And with the prophesized battle of Armageddon on the horizon, Goro would prepare himself for the end days. The prince's next appearance is during the conquest mode of the game, where he is still loyal to Shao Kahn and is currently protecting their keep. But much to his surprise, it's infiltrated by the demigod Taven. Currently on a mission to track down Shao Kahn, the two do end up coming to blows, with Taven defeating the prince. So this is the one and only time we do see Goro in the conquest mode. His next and final appearance in the original canon happens during the Battle of Armageddon, where the forces of light battle the forces of darkness. The battle was fierce with casualties on both sides, but upon the rise of the Pyramid of Argus, the a battle breaks out into a free-for-all, with everyone scrambling for the top, knowing that Blaze's power could bestow them with godhood. But by the end of this battle, all do perish, and Shao Kahn is victorious, vanquishing the elemental, bringing on true Armageddon. That is, until Raiden thwarts his plans. Mortal Kombat 9. With no other options on the table, Raiden realizes that the only way to stop Shao Kahn is by completely altering the timeline. So with his final breath, Raiden sends a message to his past self in order to prevent this future from ever happening. So from here, the universe is softly reset, and because of this, there are in fact many different changes and alterations to the timeline, with some actual characteristics being altered. Goro is one of many characters here that does have a slight adjustment in terms of personality. Unlike his original counterpart that's an honorable warrior, only doing what he believes is right for his people, here he is far more villainous and arrogant about his position of power. He's definitely driven by his ego as the tournament champion. However, everything else does seem to be the same, with how he became tournament champion and vanquished the Great Kung Lao. Now, before the butterfly effects really happen in Mortal Kombat 9, everything for the most part during the first tournament unfolds in a similar fashion. Liu Kang reigns supreme and does go on to defeat all of his opponents. This includes the likes of Goro, and thus Shao Kahn's plans are once again halted. One of the biggest differences between the original and new timeline is that Goro is very present during the second tournament and invasion. Once the second tournament begins, it does take place on Outworld's home turf, and the Shokan Prince is given the order to destroy all of the Earthrealm defenders, an opportunity that he really does relish in, as he secretly hopes that by hunting them down, he could possibly redeem himself by defeating Liu Kang. However, once this opportunity does somewhat surface, he would instead be confronted by the now arrogant Kung Lao. The two do fight, and Lao is successful in avenging his ancestors by defeating the prince. Of course, following these events, Shao would be defeated, but in his bitter loss, he would begin his invasion of Earthrealm. Goro can be seen here during this battle, where he does cross paths with the now cyberized Sub-Zero, turned against Outworld and the Lin Kuei thanks to his former allies. The cybernetic Cryomancer is not only able to defeat Goro, but Kintaro at the same time. This actually is canonically the last time we do see Goro in the main line of games, as he's only a pre-order bonus in MKX, but has no involvement in the main story. But this is where things get rather unclear. You see, between Mortal Kombat 9 and X, there was a comic book line created to bridge the gap between the two games. This in turn would help flesh out some of the newer characters and fill in the huge time gap between 9 and X. But just recently, the comic book line has been pseudo-retconned, meaning that some aspects of it have come through, but sadly it's not been clarified on what is canon and what isn't canon. But for the sake of making sure you know everything about this character, I will be talking about Goro's appearance in the comic book series. So with that being said, Mortal Kombat X comics. Now during the comic book run, through some flashback sequences, we actually get to see how close Goro worked by Shao Kahn's side during their invasion of different realms. This includes the likes of the Oztecs and the Titans, an invasion that you can tell Goro thoroughly enjoyed. Now after the fall of Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat 9, Outworld's seat of power would be claimed by Mileena. Her rule was far more cruel and ruthless than even Shao. It caused a rift to tear open between its people and the Empress. It wasn't very long before she was dethroned from her seat of power by KOTOR and his allies. Now whilst she was able to escape, a civil war would break out within Outworld, with Goro taking the side of Mileena, and from here on out, the two sides would clash multiple times, with Goro killing many of KOTOR's forces. Now initially, KOTOR didn't want to lock horns with Goro, as he knew of the prince's power. However, all of this would change during the comic book series, when Goro slayed KOTOR's father, KOTOR Ketz. Because of this, a blood feud was stoked between the two, and the prince and the Khan would clash, with KOTOR being overpowered by Goro's brute strength. But upon using blood magic through a Kami Dogu dagger, he was able to not only overpower Goro's strength, but also sever his arms, something he did to all 4 of them. Now this might not be known to many of you, but this is the ultimate form of disrespect you could do to a Shokan, literally severing them from their race, and in turn Goro's birthright, as it made him look weak and an unworthy successor to the throne. When Goro fell before his father's feet, Gorbak didn't just see this as a form of disrespect to his son, but also him and their royal lineage, and thus a huge war would break out between the Shokan Kingdom and Outworld, a battle that killed many. It was only stopped when Kotal crushed Gorbak's head. Now much like Outworld, with its king now gone, the Shokan throne would be left open, and whilst you would have expected the title of king to go to Goro, his disability had literally cut him off from his birthright, as he was not seen as a strong or worthy successor. So because of this, the Shokans would hold a tournament that would ultimately decide who would be their leader. This would be a title that Shiva would earn. From here, she would go on to be queen. Goro, on the other hand, was left shunned by his people, who not only disregarded his bloodline, but ultimately believed that he was to blame for the Outworld War in the first place. So from here, Goro would take his leave, looking for a way to reclaim his lost throne, and most importantly his arms. And this is where he learns of the tale of Onaga. Upon learning of the Dragon King's regenerative abilities, and how the Red Dragon had worshipped him, he would find a bargaining chip in the form of Kenshi to strike a deal with the Red Dragons, as he was aware that Kenshi had betrayed them in the past. When he met Dagon, he would bring the unconscious Kenshi before them and have them tell him of the Dragon King's secrets. Now, sadly, we were never given a sequel to the comic book line, and originally Goro was planned to become the new vessel for the Dragon King. I actually have a video with the writer for the comics if you are interested in seeing where that plotline would have gone. He discusses all of the plans he had set from season 1 that would ultimately pay off for season 2. I will have a link for it down in the description below. Please do click on that and it will send you over. I'm actually very proud of that video, so please do go check it out, as it would have shown you the ideas and plan for how they would have incorporated Goro's return, as well as Onaga in the new timeline and continuity. But until then, that has been everything for the history of Goro. I do hope you have enjoyed this video and learnt more by doing so. This was a really fun one to cook together, and I do apologize for it coming out a lot later than expected. This one was quite a difficult one for me to put together, but nonetheless, I do hope you have enjoyed this. I do have another history of video planned for this week, and I think I'm going to do Motaro, as I oddly feel like I'm in the mood to cover all of the sub-boss characters. So please do stick around if you want to see more Mortal Kombat content. But now, as always guys, before this video wraps up, if possible, let's try getting it to about 500 likes, and please do not forget to tick that bell, as it will keep you up to date with all of my content. So as always, please comment, like, subscribe, and share this video with everyone you know. Please do take care, and I'll see you all next time.